Okay, if everyone wants to try to file in and find a seat, that would be great. I would like to welcome you back to the Future of Transportation Summit. I get the privilege to introduce our main speaker, Nico Larco. And I'm just going to put my glasses on here and just read a few things about Nico. He is a thought leader in how new transportation technologies might change the communities that we live in. He is an academic expert in sustainable urban design and suburban development, with a focus on how city design affects transportation choices. His work includes looking at the ability of cities and regions to adapt to changes over time. At the University of Oregon, he is an associate professor of architecture, director of Urbanism Next, and the co-director of Sustainable Cities Initiative. So we had a chance to talk with Nico last night at a dinner, and it was great to hear some of the same conversations that we're trying to have today were going on last night. We're all talking about this starting of a discussion, and we want to keep that discussion going. I'm very excited about the things that Nico brings. When we started looking at a guest speaker to bring out here, it really felt like he was going to bring us a different perspective maybe than we've talked about before, and really have that interaction between technology and what it means to communities. So I would like to welcome Nico to the stage.
Thanks so much. Okay, can you all hear me? Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Eileen and to Elizabeth, who's helped organize this. I really appreciate being invited out here and being able to talk to all of you. So as mentioned, I'm Nico Larco. I'm a director of the Urbanism Next Center, and at Urbanism Next, we look at the impacts of autonomous vehicles, e-commerce, sharing economy, new mobility on cities. We are less interested in those technologies themselves. What we're really interested in is how is this going to really affect these cities? How's it going to affect things like land use, land values, transportation, street design, neighborhood design, equity concerns, all these different pieces. And so that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. So if you Google future city, future of cities, you get images like this. And you look at that and you think, oh God, I think I've seen movies that look like that. And everyone's probably like wearing like black and like turtlenecks and things. And you look at that and you think, Salt Lake doesn't look like that. Utah doesn't look like that. We are okay. We are not in the future. Everything's fine. We can keep doing the stuff that we're doing because we're not at the future. The problem is that the future looks like this. So this is in Arizona, in the Phoenix area, where right now, Waymo, which is Google's autonomous vehicle arm, is running level 4 automation. Level 4 automation is a car that does not need anyone in the front seat at all, right? And that is not a myth or like an imagined thing. That is happening right now, today, in Arizona. And it's not just with Google employees, it's regular people who are getting into a car with nobody in the front seat and getting moved around. And our streets look like this. So the moral of the story here is that even though our cities continue to look like they've always looked, or they've looked recently, everything is changing. And we need to realize that we can't keep doing the same things that we're doing. We need to change the way that we work. As I mentioned, we work on these things in Urbanism Next, AVs, new mobility, e-commerce, sharing economy, but we're really focused on that stuff down below. How does it affect cities? How does it affect communities? How does it affect the way that we live? Very apropos for the topics you guys have this year. So to talk about new mobility services are one of the main things that we talk about. This is a whole category of things. Maybe you've heard of mobility as a service, right? That instead of buying an automobile, having a commodity that is the way I move around, I buy a trip, right? And then there's all these different ways to make a trip. There's this historic thing called public transit we've had for a long time, which is a way of making trips. But then we have things like microtransit. So this is like Via or Uber Pool is somewhat in that range, where there's a vehicle that's going to be taking many different people around, not all going to the same place. There's ride-hailing, ride-share, TNCs, transportation network companies. This is Uber and Lyft type companies, right? How many people have ridden an Uber or Lyft? Yeah, right? I'll go back to that with the percentage of people doing that. Car share, so that's things like Zip Mile or Zipcar, where we can borrow a car. Sometimes it's station-based, sometimes you can take it somewhere else. Bike share, which you all know of. You saw you have the green bikes here. And e-scooters, which I saw are all over the place, at least in Salt Lake. I was shocked to see how much of that is happening. So there's this whole new suite of things called new mobility services where that we can use to get around. And in the US, it is a madhouse, crazy, Wild West is what I usually call it, right? There's a ton of companies that are playing in this space, trying things out, making new models happening, trying out new models, failing, trying something different, looking for new use cases. It's completely the Wild West. We have no idea where this is going to land, and it is changing every day. Literally, I spend about an hour and a half every day just finding out what happened in the last day related to these topics. It is quickly shifting field. So let's talk for a minute about how quickly we take up these new technologies when we have two new technologies. So if you look here, the bottom axis there is time. So going up till 2005. And the vertical axis is percentage of US households that have adopted that technology. And what you see is that as we get closer to today, the lines get steeper and steeper. So whereas the telephone took about 100 years to get to 95% adoption, the cell phone took 10. The moral here is that when we have new technologies in the society that we exist in today, right? Google Maps was a good example from earlier. When we have that new technology, we take it up quick, right? So which means that for all the work that you're doing, you can't wait for the new technology to arrive because it will be taken up quick, and which means all the ramifications of that, all the externalities of that are going to be taken up quick. So we need to be thinking ahead before these things arrive. So where are we in the adoption rates of these new technologies? Last year, Uber and Lyft type services did 4.2 billion trips. Billion with a B. These services did not exist 10 years ago, and they're at 4.2 billion trips in the US. A study came out from Pew earlier this year. Who's taking these things? 36% of people. 2 years earlier, it was half that, right? 36% of people. 51% of millennials, which is really important because none of us matter. The people that matter are the millennials that are coming up, because all of us are dinosaurs and we're going to end up like, even if we don't use it that much, if they're using it this much, all that's going to change, right? And then 19% of people in rural areas. This completely shocked me. I had no idea that it was going to be that high in rural areas. This new technology is impacting us all over the place. In the US, we have 36 million docked bike share trips that happened last year, which is, I'd say, pretty fantastic given the kind of infrastructure that we have in this country. Really good. You can see there, it took about 9 years for us to get to that. Pretty substantial growth. And then in May of last year, this happened. May of last year, scooters arrived. Santa Monica was the first place that they really took off. And then this happened, which is they went everywhere, right? And when did Salt Lake get them? July 2018. All right, soon after, right? So last year, there were 38 million scooter trips. 38 million. It didn't really exist before May. Kind of existed, but not really at scale before May. 38 million trips. So that's bike share. They're scooters. What this should tell you, once again, when a new technology arrives, we adopt it quick if it works for us. And two, the transportation system is ripe for disruption, right? I mean, this is crazy. Who would have guessed that something like this would happen? The idea that we all just move around in our own cars and find a place to park and pay for all that, these tremendous costs of owning a car, right? There are other options that are much, much more reasonable for a lot of the things that we do. I'm dying to see what the numbers are this year. I assume it's going to be twice that or something, right? So this is just in 1 year. AVs. AVs are coming. So just to give you a brief timeline of the progress of autonomous vehicles. Ancient history way back in 2016. How many of you guys were alive in 2016? Right? Yeah. August 2016, first AV hits the street that anyone can get into it. So this is Uber in Pittsburgh. At the same time, it happens in Singapore. Still, you can get in, call up an AV, show up. It's level 3, so there's someone always able to take over the seat. October 2016 in Colorado nearby, they have the first freight delivery, which is beer, gets delivered. November 2017, in Arizona and Chandler, they have the first level 4. So Waymo, which is way ahead of any other AV company by a long shot, has first level 4 automation. So these are cars that do not need anyone in the front seat. That was way back 2017. January 2018, 2 things happened. GM Cruise goes in for permit at the federal level to be able to build a car that has no steering wheel and no pedals. And at the same time, Waymo reserves orders for 20,000 vehicles. 20,000 vehicles. In June 2018, they say, give us another 62,000. So Waymo has reserved orders for 82,000 vehicles. Keep that in mind. December 2018, in Arizona, Waymo starts allowing level 4 automation for non-employees. So it's not everyone, but for a group of people, you can just call up and a car can show up. I just actually was at Waymo a few weeks ago, and it turns out that it seems like they're actually doing some trials without anyone in the front seat at all. It comes up, you get in, it takes you where you need to go. August 2019, just recently they said they were starting trials in Florida, which is really important because Florida has not great weather. So the idea that they can start expanding to places that are not sunny all the time is a big difference. AVs have a lot more trouble in weather, so this is a big push. In August 2019, Didi, which is China's largest AV kind of company, announced that they were going to start trials in the next few months with passengers in China. So this stuff is happening quickly, all right? It is progressing. An important piece to think about with this is that AV deployment is going to be stepped. It's not going to be that one day there's going to be like 3 AVs in Utah, and then there's going to be like 18, and then 47. What's going to happen is one day Waymo's going to be like, you're ready, here's 2,000 AVs. And they're going to run a fleet here, much like Uber, much like the scooter companies, right? It will land and it will be here, and it will start having impacts on all your communities. When that happens is completely unknown, and it's also not going to happen for all of Utah. It's probably not even going to happen for all of Salt Lake. It'll happen for a core area, and then they'll slowly expand it as the technology gets better and they test the models out more. But it's not going to be a gradual, here's the first one, 3 years from now we'll see a few more. It's going to be stepped. And one thing to think about as well, I say this all the time, AVs already exist in our cities, they just have drivers. What I mean by that is that Uber and Lyft is exactly the AV model. I call it up, it shows up, I get in, it takes me somewhere, I get out, and it goes and does something else. That is an AV, it just has a driver. So as we think about what are the impacts going to be for AVs, we don't have to think about this, bizarre future city. We can look at the impacts right now. What is happening with TNCs, with Uber and Lyft? That's what's going to happen with AVs. AVs will just be that on steroids. It's just going to accelerate it tremendously. Another thing for us to all be paying attention to is e-commerce. Right now, depending on what studies you look at, it's somewhere around 14% of all retail that's happening in the country, 14%. And you see the trend is nothing but growing. Some sectors are being more impacted by this than others, but it is growing tremendously. And it's having all sorts of impacts. On the one hand, it's changing the number of people who walk into stores. This is from 2017, so 2016 Black Friday season, 12% drop in the number of people who walked into a store. Right? That same year, we saw the largest number of store closures in the history of the United States. What was the economy doing that year? Booming. Largest number of store closures in the history of the United States. Right? So that is absolutely happening. That's only continued. So every year we've seen significant drops in the number of people who walk into a store on Black Fridays. Think about all your parking regulations that are usually gauged to those days, right? You don't need those anymore. And already this year, in April, we were going to exceed last year's total of store closures in a booming economy. And then there's this thing, right? Packages need to get delivered, the goods delivery side. Changing the way freight works, changing the way that warehousing works. Last year, 11 billion, with a B, e-commerce packages were delivered in this country. To give you a sense of that, that is 118 packages per household. That is 1 every 3 days. Yeah, 1 every 3 days. You guys do transportation, right? Yeah, packages 1 every 3 days. How many of you got something from Amazon in the last month? Yes, right? This is a huge impact. This is happening now. So the change that we're talking about is happening now. This is not a future. This is not, the Blade Runner image I showed you, the looking image that I showed you at the beginning. This stuff is happening now. which means that you need to change the way that you're working. You cannot keep doing the same thing you're doing. You can't be looking at the same models. You can't be looking at the same ways of working. Things have to change. So what we ask a whole lot is, all right, these impacts are happening, or these changes are happening. How's it going to impact the city? What's it going to mean for cities, communities? So I'm going to go through some of these things quickly. So the first one is, and it was mentioned earlier today, there's going to be an increase in VMT and in congestion. That is pretty, at first people thought AVs were going to be fantastic, and TNCs are going to help us all out with congestion. TNCs are a mess for congestion right now. A study by Bruce Schaller last year looked, I think it was 5 metro areas, found that 180% increase. That's not 80%, that's 180% increase in VMT for those trips, right? Because the car is like circling, waiting for you, and then you call it and it's got to get to you, and then that person needs to drive home or back to like wherever it is that they're working. 180% increase. That is a lot of congestion. In San Francisco right now, I think it's something like the TNCs account for, transportation network companies, Uber, Lyft, account for something like, I think it's 6% of rides and account for 13% of the congestion. Ouch, right? As this continues to grow, what does that mean for all of our streets? How is it going to work with transit? 2 great potentials here. On the one hand, it could be a boon for transit, first, last mile options, all these things, TNCs and scooters could be fantastic for getting us bike share, could be fantastic for getting us to and from transit, or it could be I live about 2.5 miles away from the center of Portland, and I could take a TNC to this light rail, but it's just a couple bucks more for me to go to the city center, so why don't I just do that, right? And so we replace trips. Well, the data so far is not great, not happy, we'll say. So great study was done looking at when a TNC, again, that's Uber and Lyft, transportation network company, entered a market in the United States, and what happened to transit use after that. So for each year that the TNC existed, you went down 1.3% in heavy rail ridership and 1.7% in bus ridership. And Uber said in its public, its IPO, it sees transit as a key competitor. It's walked back that statement pretty hard, right? But it is absolutely competing right now with transit. That same Schaller study that I talked to you about before, 60% of trips on Uber and Lyft type services were coming from walking, biking, or transit. That is not exactly what we want to see when we think about congestion, when we want to talk about air quality. These are not great numbers. Scooters are, right now we're trying to figure it out. 49% would have walked or biked. So this is kind of monetizing walking and biking, maybe not the best thing to do. 34% would have used a car. Fantastic. That is a great benefit to get people out of cars and working in scooters. And 11% would have taken a bus. Not sure about that one either. Recently, we've got a panel next where we'll talk about the number of people who are using it to get to transit. So this is early. We're still in that Wild West mentality, trying to figure out how all these things work, but there's potentials here and also risks. Some of the other potentials, things that could happen. The biggest one is parking. There are somewhere between 1 and 2 billion parking spots in the country, according to Donald Shoup, who's the guru of parking. It's the largest single land use by surface area in the entire country in cities, in urban areas. And if any of you have done anything with work in development, it covers everything we do. It guides everything we do, right? Well, it just so happens that with all these new mobility services, we don't need anywhere near as much parking. If I have my mobility as a service, if I'm just buying a ride, and I don't have my mobility as a commodity, I have a car, I don't need it stored anywhere. If I took Uber out here, that car just went and did something else. I don't need all the parking that we have in front of here, right? So you can significantly reduce parking demand. With AVs, that even goes higher. So there's studies that say we're only going to need somewhere between 10 and 20% of the parking spots that we have right now. That changes everything, right? On the one hand, huge opportunities for density. You can't build as many units there because you can't fit the parking in. Done. We don't need that parking. You've had space that now you had to use for parking, so you had lots or structures. Now you can put development there. So places that want to have more density, huge opportunities for that. Even in suburban areas. So the strip mall or the office park, no need for those seas of parking out there, right? So you can actually start shifting that. And I'm a developer out there. I've got this space. I want to put development in there. What else can I do there to generate income? And then affordability. I think it's the national average is $225 per $225 increase in your rent based on if it comes with parking, right? If we don't need to carry the cost of that parking, the whole cost of development goes down, the feasibility of projects goes up, and the cost of units goes down, right? So huge opportunities across the board. There's this other side of it, right? This is Portland. Downtowns don't have a ton of parking typically. Depending on the downtown, there's different models here, but they're going to be somewhat effective, but not tremendously great. There's usually development pressure there. We'll be able to do that. Suburban areas, there's a whole lot of parking out there. So on the one hand, huge opportunities for redevelopment. We can start creating semi-urban nodes in suburbia. A lot of the things that were talked about earlier about walkable communities, being able to bring people closer together, we can fill these spaces with those types of things. On the other hand, what happens if this change happens fairly quickly and all of a sudden this land is available and added to the supply of land in an urban area without changing demand? What happens if you increase supply and don't change demand? Prices go down, right? What does that mean for your tax base? What's that mean if you own the property? If you own a house, ouch. If you don't, wait, this should be good for you, right? And both those images before, this was Portland, and this one right here is Gresham, so one of the suburbs of Portland. Huge development pressure happening in these areas, right? This is Cincinnati. No development pressure. That's a whole lot of land that we just added to the rolls. What's your community look like? How much parking do you have? Where is it located? Could you redevelop it? Right? These are all questions you need to be asking yourself. I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of parking consultants, super fun people, parking consultants. You really got to go out with them throughout the country. The mantras: do not build any parking you do not absolutely need, and anything you do build that's structured, you better think about it being flat slab and high floor to floor so you can convert it into something else, because you've got a 30-year bond on that thing. You are not going to pay that off. This is a calculable risk, right? So that's going to affect property values. Think about municipal budgets. Many of you have relationships to those things, right? That is painful. Another point to think about, commute times. So in the US, typically, this is actually global numbers, but in the US, it's about 26 minutes is what we're doing for commutes right now, on average, each direction. And what happens with AVs? Well, all of a sudden, my commute in 26 minutes, I can go further because I can go faster. AVs will be faster in freeways and on arterials. I don't believe they're going to change speeds a whole lot in urban areas because we have these things called people in cities that don't like to get run over. So that's going to be a significant shift. At the same time, instead of having to do this all the time, I can now work or eat or sleep or hang out with my kids or watch a movie. So maybe I'm willing to do, instead of 26, maybe I'll do 30, maybe I'll do 35 minutes. So I can go even further. So if all you want in life is some nice green land out in the woods, or you really want cheaper land, now you're going to be willing to go further for those things. You're going to be able to go further for those things. So the pressure on sprawl is going to be tremendous. I think air quality is an issue that I've heard come up a whole bunch of times. What does it do when we are having all this pressure on sprawl? Higher cost of infrastructure, as you know, higher cost to maintain those things, environmental issues, harder to provide services in low-density development, and we just expanded the metropolitan footprint, the amount of land where you can build. What happened to cities when the car arrived? Exactly this. Central cities' prices were depressed. The peripheries got a little bit higher. Well, we'll see that same thing just tremendously once again. Other things to think about, fiscal issues. So with AVs, we're going to have more cars on the road and less total cars. For all of you who have cars out there, which I'm going to guess is almost everyone, what's your car doing right now? Parked. 95% of the time, your car is parked. It is a horribly inefficient system. With fleets of AVs, those cars, let's say even we get 50% utilization rates. We only need 1/20th of the number of cars, right? So huge change in the number of the fleets of cars, which means registration rates go down. So UDOT's registration fees goes down. Gas tax goes down. Most of these things are electrical, so that's going to be mostly wiped out. Traffic citations, they shouldn't do anything wrong, so that's wiped out. And then there's this other thing called parking fees. In the 25 largest cities in the US, $2.8 billion in parking fees. What happens when that goes away, right? And in some places like San Francisco, those parking fees are being used to feed transit. What happens when that revenue source goes away? So a big point I'm trying to make here is AVs and MAAS, mobility as a service, are not transportation issues. And what I mean by that is they're not only transportation issues. They're going to affect all parts of our lives. They're going to affect all parts of our cities. And e-commerce is not a retail issue. It's, again, going to affect all parts of our lives, all parts of our cities. Why do I say these things? Two reasons. One, I really think it's true. And I think the examples that I've shown you hopefully help illustrate that. But the second really important reason is that you can't talk about these things only with transportation people. The changes that we need to make, we need to be forward-thinking, we need to be proactive. To be able to do that, you need to build coalition. And you're not going to do that talking to a bunch of people only about transportation. You got to go out and talk to people who are interested in housing, in equity issues, environmental issues, economic development, and show them how these changes that are very much in your world, are going to be affecting all of them. So you can figure out how you can find champions in that to build the political will to make the changes that we need to make. I'll say, oftentimes, state agencies, city agencies are not the most nimble, we'll say. A lot of good reasons for that. But if you're in a situation where the world is changing quickly, staying the same is a risk. The example I gave last night when we were talking, if I keep my head down and just keep on making horseshoes, because that's what I've done all my life, and I don't look up to figure out that cars are arriving, that's a problem, right? We are in that moment right now. That's what's happening right now. So we have to change the way that we work. A few things to keep in mind. Start with community goals. We do not need technology. There's no need for us to have these new technologies. What we need is what our community wants to do, and then we leverage these technologies to get to those things. So don't ask, how do I bring these things into my community? Don't start with that question. Don't ask, what does it need from us? Start with, what do we want to do? Where do we want to get? Okay, how can this help me do that? And we talk a lot to the private sector companies, which we're about to have some of them come up here, and help them understand how it is they can solve your problems, not just be deployed. Because that is how we need to focus on this. So start with community goals, be nimble, figure out how you can move quickly through things, how you can try things out. A really important part of this is be able to fail, which means creating a culture that allows failure, which means the leadership at UDOT needs to support that, the political leadership needs to support that, your conversations with the public needs to support that, and you need to create a culture where it's okay to fail. You should do it quickly, you should tell people, you should figure out what went wrong, but you need to try things out, because when the world's moving really quickly, we cannot simply keep doing the things that we're doing. And lastly, think ahead. You have to think beyond where we are right now, think about what these impacts might be. Don't wait for them to arrive. That is too late. That was a big lesson with scooters. Fantastic. The deployment was a little bit of a mess, but I think we're really getting good places the way the cities are working with private sector companies on that right now. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but you need to be thinking ahead. I invite you all, if you're interested in these topics, I invite you all to come to urbanismnext.com, which is a site that we've got for a lot of these topics. We're about to launch in January the Nexus, which is going to be a one-stop shop to talk about all these issues, latest research, topics about this, discussion, policies that exist around these topics, so we invite you to that. We're also, if you're interested in this, we invite you to come to a conference that we're holding. This will be our third conference on these topics in Portland. We do it with a bunch public sector, private sector, academic sector, across a whole bunch of disciplines to really deal directly with these topics. This is what we talk about, so I invite you to come to that. And with that, do we have time for questions? No. We don't have time for questions, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, so thank you very much. So I will invite our panelists up here now. Thank you all for coming. So what we've planned now is to do about an hour talking to people from industry to think about what they're seeing, what futures they see, what they're interested in seeing in terms of the relationship with the public sector, seeing how that's shifting and where we can all be heading together. So I'm going to give each of you about 3 minutes we talked about to introduce yourselves, and then we will go from there. Do you want to go ahead and, do we have an order of the slides? Okay. Do you want to start and we'll put the slides up in just a minute? Great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Armstrong, and I'm a vice president at Panasonic, North America. And oftentimes I have opportunities like this to speak to large groups of people, and I have to wonder if all of you aren't thinking, why is this person going to talk to me about microwaves and cameras and refrigerators from Panasonic when we're here to talk about transportation technology? So I want to tell you a little bit more about Panasonic, and then I'm really excited today to tell you a lot about what we're doing with UDOT and how we're helping innovate in transportation around the country. So first off, a little bit about Panasonic is I can almost guarantee you if we go out into the parking lot or wherever your car may be today and we took the entire thing apart, something from Panasonic is in your car. We build advanced safety systems. We build infotainment, which is kind of the central nervous system of your car. We build different types of seatbelt technology, mirror technology, all kinds of stuff. We don't build everything in a car, but Panasonic is very much in the DNA of the vehicles that are driving around on our roadways today, which is certainly a big part of transportation. On top of that, we do a lot of other things. If you have flown recently and you used Wi-Fi on a plane or maybe seat back entertainment or bring your own device entertainment, Panasonic builds a large majority of the market for in-cabin entertainment and in-cabin Wi-Fi. We like to say if your Wi-Fi worked great, it was Panasonic. If it didn't, then it was GoGo. So just know that Panasonic does a lot in today's world. We're a $75 billion company with 250,000 employees globally, and we increasingly touch more lives every day with physical products. I had shaved this morning with a Panasonic razor, but increasingly we're building digital products for the world, and that's why we're here today talking about transportation. So I run our connected vehicle business, and we are building a platform for transportation agencies called Cirrus by Panasonic, which you'll hear me talk about more today. But this platform that Panasonic and UDOT are building in collaboration is all about connected car technology. And the way I like to summarize that is in the 70s, vehicle manufacturers put seatbelts in cars, and that seatbelt is responsible for keeping you in your seat, right? Don't go through the windshield, don't hit things in front of you, don't let things hit you. Connected vehicle technology is like the digital seatbelt of our generation. So it is a protective data layer around the car that is constantly trying to assess what's going on from other vehicles and sharing its own status about what's going on. So you've probably been in a situation recently where you want to turn left and you're trying to judge that traffic coming the other direction, right? You're trying to see around the car in front of you that's turning left the other way, and you're trying to see when that gap comes around. Connected car technology is all about making us safer in exactly those types of situations, where we can't see exactly what's happening, but our car and the data that our car is generating can very much help us do that. So imagine all those scenarios in transportation that you come around or you interact with on a daily basis, and that's what connected car technology is about, and that's how we're working with UDOT to capture that data and make the people driving around in your roadways safer every day. So I have a little bit of an animation here that will speak to the data. First off, we know our cars are increasingly connected, and we want to take advantage of that data. If we capture the data from that slide, which is the first animation, we're collecting vehicle to infrastructure data. So we're getting a status about what's happening on the roadway. And you can imagine with all the cars driving out there, really only a cloud platform can possibly process and navigate all that data to find the important information. So one more slide. What we're building with Utah is the V2X data ecosystem. And then if you have that type of data available to you, you can send data out to cars. You can help cars better understand the status of things going on in the world. On top of that, vehicles aren't the only things you have at your fingertips, right? So another click, your cameras, your sensors, your weather stations that are out there, all of that can provide better contextual information about what's happening and what the status of the infrastructure is. And then lastly, you can't just share with cars, right? You have to tell people what's happening out in the world before they even make decisions about getting in their cars. And that will be a really important part of the future transportation network that we'll talk a lot about today. So thank you for your time. I'm excited to be here and appreciate the audience.
Great. You want to pass on the clicker?
Hi, I'm Mackenzie Vio. I do local operations here for Lime Scooters in Utah. I'm here to talk to you because Lime's purpose is to reimagine urban life through the wonder of mobility. we're looking to improve the quality of life in urban environments through technology and transportation. How many of you have taken a scooter ride? Show of hands. Yes. How many of you had fun on said scooter ride? Yeah, I think that's what scooters are doing. They're improving quality of life in urban environments. Just some statistics here in Utah. We're excited to celebrate that Lime has passed the 1 million ride threshold. Globally, as a company, we're celebrating 100 million rides since our start in 2017. So big numbers. I have a past experience in bike share, and it's so cool to be at Lime where they're doing the things we couldn't imagine a decade ago as not being possible. So kind of the three things that go into the quality and life improvement that I think scooters provide is first, why you all just raised your hands. Scooters bring joy. They're fun, they're exciting, it's a new mode of transportation. The second is connectivity. They're efficient. They're allowing people to have a first mile, last mile solution. 50% of local riders have used them to connect to transit in the last month. That's a really fun statistic for us. And the third thing is sustainability. I think that's important with the climate crisis, and we're improving our greener and greener options all the time. They're about as emission efficient as a seat on a bus, and growing steadily improving. So thank you, looking forward to being here.
Good morning. My name is Warren Schramm. I'm with a design firm called Teague. We have been around for 93 years, and our focus has been recently, and for the last 73 years, on mobility. We've put an image up here of one of the projects that we did a couple of years ago, and this is a urban bus for children. What we want to look at is how the effect on actual people, not all of you that are in the industry, though you are all affected as well, but all of the other folks, the people that are actually getting around and using mobility, how their lives are going to change. And when we want to look at that, one of the most provocative ways to look at that, especially when it comes to autonomy, was looking at our children. What would it take for you to feel confident to let your child get on a vehicle where there is no other human being in that vehicle? What do you need to know as a parent? What do you need to know when they arrive? What are the things that we kind of take for granted today? So right now, when you get into a bus, or your child gets onto a bus, there's a bus driver. There is another human being in that vehicle, which tells us that that vehicle is intrinsically safe because someone else got in it. And they went through a background check, and they went through all of these approval processes, and that's how they were able to move our children. When we start to think about changes in mobility, it's not just what's going to change the school bus and how that we become comfortable with putting people in empty spaces. It's also changing the way we think about moving. So part of what I'm here today to talk about is how that is shifting for the next generation and even us today. We don't think of it from the way we would just a few years ago. We'll use the iPhone or Google Maps example. If you go back 12 years ago, the vast majority of us, if we were going from point A to point B, we would get a car. When we are traveling, we would buy a rental car, and we would use the rental car to get around because that's what you knew. If you were from the city, a big city, let's say New York, you might think about taking a taxi. That would be exciting, right? That's what you knew when you were from the city. But today, how many of you have Uber or Lyft on your phones right now? Raise your hands. Nice. How many of you before had used a taxi? Significantly less hands. We think about mobility in a totally different way, and that is continuing to change. If you look at scooters, if you look at bikes, if you look at car share, if you all of the options that are now springing up around us, our kids, the young adults, the millennials that are taking over the world, they see mobility as a series of choices that they get to string together. They don't need a driver's license anymore. They need to figure out how to get around, how to use mobility. And that's what we're really excited about, is all the different ways that we can bring that to life.
Great. So as a first question, I'd like for each of you to think about Utah. You can decide 10 or 20 years, right? So it's in the foreseeable future. What do you see as an attainable future? Not crazy, Jetsons, maybe Jetsons, who knows? but an attainable future for Utah for how we'd see a shift in transportation in the next 10, 20 years. You want to start?
Sure, absolutely. I think what's really important as we continue along in this increasingly connected world is that our government and Utah DOT continue to play in the changing world that's happening fast. Nico talked a lot about how quickly these things are happening with e-commerce, with autonomous vehicles, with development. And we're seeing an increasingly digital world where the interactions will always continue to be physical, of course, and DOTs are built to manage the physical infrastructure that is out there in the world. But increasingly, our transactions, our interactions, our sharing are going to happen in a digital way. And what I hope to see in 10 years, what I would predict is that you'll take the physical infrastructure that you're managing today, the right-of-way that you're managing today, and you'll be responsible for communicating the digital version of that infrastructure. The bridge height, the traffic signal status, the degree of curvature of a roadway, all of these things that you physically build today, there's going to need to be a digital version of that. And some of those things are static and fairly straightforward, right? The location of a sign, the height of a bridge, those don't change very quickly. But especially the things in your infrastructure that are changing very quickly, the specific location and activity within a construction zone, the traffic signal status, the changing weather, all of those things that move fast, a DOT is going to have to be prepared to communicate to those things digitally because, in my opinion, the first and foremost responsibility of every DOT around the country is safety. And so when autonomous vehicles hit the roadways or Lime scooters hit the roadways or anything like that, knowing that status of your infrastructure, everything you do today very physically is going to be critical in interacting with these increasingly digital assets that hit the road. So just like you have your physical right-of-way today, I think in 10 years, this DOT has to be prepared to build, sustain, and manage your digital right-of-way.
Great.
Yeah, this is a question we talk about very frequently at Lime. How quick can we get to that future vision? What has the past taught us about transition and what's realistic? We constantly go back to the early 1900s as the example and horses as the main form of transportation. In the early 1900s, horses were it. London headlines read, if a new solution isn't found in the next 50 years, London streets will be under 9 feet of manure. So that was the crisis at hand, right? Poop everywhere. So luckily, Henry Ford came along and the Model T was invented. And within 4 years, New York City had more cars than horses. In 9 years, New York City, the last horse-drawn carriage exited. So I think it's possible that in 10 years, we can see a major transition. What do I think that's going to look like? I think climate change is our crisis. I think electrical vehicles are what's coming. I don't think e-scooters are maybe the vision. I think that's a good 1-mile solution. People are going to not just default to cars. They're going to pick the mode of transportation that suits their journey. So
20 years is almost science fiction.
Yeah.
There's a futurist, Amy Webb, who, if you have not had the chance to experience one of her talks, I highly recommend them. They're on YouTube. She's done a couple TED Talks. She talks about transportation as kind of what's the North Star? What is the ultimate form of transportation? And a lot of folks would say that's the flying car, right? We were promised flying cars. Why don't we have flying cars? And her take is the ultimate form of transportation is a transporter. Star Trek got it right. You should be able to just beam wherever you need to be because you're going to be there instantly. You'll have replicators in your house, and your goods will show up immediately. Like, I want my favorite barbecue sliders. They come out of the replicator ready to go. Done. I need a new package from Amazon. Nothing actually comes in the mail. It just materializes in my living room or kitchen. That's not going to happen in 20 years. But I think it's important to use that as the North Star, right? That's what people are thinking about when we start to talk about transportation. And there's some key aspects of it that get lost. Mobility is about time as much as it is about cost. So in Seattle, I'm going to let you use Seattle as kind of a window into the future. The idea of a 26-mile or average commute, 29 minutes, 26 to 29 minutes of your commute. For me, that is going 8 miles. 8 miles. I can bike that distance in 40 minutes, and that's even because of congestion, or depending on how sweaty I want to get. The time is just as important. We have, just in my short little 8-mile commute, there is a 6-lane freeway. There are two 4-lane bridges. That's 2 directions of traffic going in each direction, and they are jam-packed. And they are jam-packed from 7 a.m. until maybe 7 p.m. There's no break for lunch. It's solid all the time. It changes direction, northbound versus southbound, but the roadways are full. If we look 20 years in the future, I think what we're really going to start to deal with is the shift into a fully augmented age. The example that we had earlier about Google Maps is very apropos. The work that you guys are doing about instrumentation is going to change the way that we perceive what is going on around us. So with the instrumented age, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this idea, all of you have a mobile phone in your pocket. All of you think about looking something up. You talk about Googling it, right? That is augmentation. We are all part cyborg right now. It's just started with a little device in your pocket instead of something physically being implanted into your body. So when we think 20 years in the future, it's the ability to perceive exactly what my trip looks like. Everything, every bit of traffic, every bit of construction, the flows for the last 4 days through that area, the flows through the last hour, the predicted change of what will happen on that route. And my way of traveling through that will be totally optimized for that. And that optimization will definitely include an intermodal trip. It will no longer be the idea that I will get one form of transportation, whether that's public transit, a scooter, or a car. I'm going to take multiple ways likely to get there. But all of that will be facilitated through my augmentation. It may not be cell phones at this point. We're 20 years in the future. It could be heads-up displays and our virtual reality glasses. The other alternative is that I will have the same option for whatever it is that I may need to do coming to me. So it won't just be about me going somewhere. It will be about the idea that whatever I need could show up for me. We already see that now. Amazon has, if I'm missing a cable, I can have a cable show up in my studio in 2 hours or less. Like nothing. And in the past, I would have had to get a courier and coordinate it through a shop, all of that. Amazon Prime now, and it shows up. The last part that I want to think about here is that us as a people, the quality of life aspect of this, I think, is really important. If you look 20 years in the future and you think about population density changes, that's going to mean that our tight communities are going to become even tighter. You can't fit more people in without density increasing. As the sprawl increases, we become disconnected as people. So I think in 20 years, you're going to see less people going far away to work, my hope. I know that the AVs will provide options to make that possible, but my hope is that you would work close, that you would have small manufacturing and the ability for the parts that you built in your neighborhood to go up to a larger manufacturing plant somewhere in an industrial area. Better use of rail, drones, or whatever it is that makes sense to move those things around, or services in your local area. Doctors that perform house calls because that is the most efficient way for them to interact with their patients. So the future's bright.
So I want to ask you all talked about transportation changes in these 10, 20 years. I got a question about how it is that we're going to be changing, how cities are going to change. A little bit building on the question that you, or the points that you were just bringing up. All of us, how many see congestion as a problem in cities, right? We all run into it. No one likes it. All the things that we look at in the future seem to say more trips, right? Potentially more distance, problem. The session this morning, great panel we had this morning, everyone talked about how they'd like to just have, be able to walk and bike to places, be able to have the community nearby. But a lot of the discussion that happens at DOTs is about how we move more vehicles, right? Even move more people, right? As opposed to changing where it is that we need to go. So what do you all see as changes that are going to happen to cities because of these changes, because of these trends, we'll say? You want to start with that since you were
Yeah.
over there?
There was a report that came out a couple weeks ago called the Blueprint for the City of the Future. And the guideline that they gave in there is that cities should be optimized to move 10,000 human beings through an hour through whatever form of conduit you have. So if you think about that, that means that we're going to be more focused on human beings moving around than the cars. Because cars are an incredibly inefficient way to move a human being. And we still haven't really figured out how to share cars or vehicles with people that we don't know that well. There's a lot of work going on in that space. But I think that's the big shift for cities, is changing what our targets were. In the past, your targets would be a number of parking spaces or a number of cars in a given time frame. Now we're talking about moving people. Those vehicles that are on the road could be moving goods for us. I think people are it's going to be more approachable to say, have my groceries delivered to my house and less of a luxury item to do that. That may be the more efficient way to do it. If you think about it, back in the day, steaks and milk and other things were delivered to your door. That was the way your neighborhood worked. I'm hoping that as a culture we move back to that idea of a neighborhood, knowing the services and the things that are around you.
Yeah. And it just seems like it's a geometry problem.
Yes.
Like, we just cannot move more enormous car things and get those type of numbers as we increase trips and we increase, the number of people. Salt Lake's growing tremendously. A lot of the communities that represent Utah are growing tremendously. It's a geometry problem. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would speak to holistic design. I think this is something that's on UDOT's radar and we're all thinking about for the future. But instead of streets that move traffic and move people, have them revert to be gathering spaces. Generally now, cities are about 25 to 30% streets. How cool would it be if they were 10% streets and 15% social gathering spaces that could promote small business and that sort of thing? Active transportation, more walking, more biking, more scooting. That's my vision.
Yeah, I think you all said it, but to me, cities of today are bad physics. A 5,000-pound vehicle doesn't interact very well with a 200-pound human being, and if you had a bike, then a 220-pound human being. Those physics just don't make sense, right? And the challenge of urbanism is capacity, and we can't, in really any urban area, grow horizontally. We can't add more roads. We can't do more of that. So we'll of course see things go up. That is only one way to increase capacity. I do think we'll see drone deliveries for efficiencies. You don't have to send a 2,000-pound car to go deliver a 1-ounce cable. You can do things a lot of different ways. So I think the biggest changes we're probably going to see, and government agencies and DOTs are going to be critical to this, is we have to have the physics make sense. The people have to be in a place where people can interact with each other. The bikes have to be in a place where bikes can interact with each other, and the cars or the heavy moving objects have to be in a place where they can interact with each other. And that's going to take a lot of change. You can't just change a roadway overnight, right? So this has to be planned, and it has to be intentional. And one thing the government can do really, really well always is when you make plans and they're intentional, you can disrupt and drive change, right? If you decide now you're going to have a pedestrian path or a bicycle path, the bikes will find that path. And you have that sort of influence in the world. So we need to put things together that make sense, make the physics good, and we'll go up. And I think you all have to think about yourselves as a DOT in that way. What is your management of the airspace? Utah DOT is probably already the most innovative in that way, right? You have someone dedicated to flying drones. You have someone dedicated to thinking about that challenge every day. I can promise you this DOT is well ahead of many others in that space. So the last thing I would add is, today with our sort of running of the bulls physics, we have bulls and we have people interacting if our bulls are cars. We have to be thoughtful about the equity side of that equation as well, right? There's lots of ways to drive change. You can do it by getting people to pay. That's what's happening in London. They're making it impossible to pay to get into the city, or impossible for people to buy gas to get into the city. But when you make these significant changes, what is the equity side of that? How does everybody benefit? How do we make sure the socioeconomic aspects of that are capital driven, because that's the country we live in, but are not inequitable?
Great. A lot of things you all talked about, which I think has been a mantra for a number of years, especially I think in Utah, is land use is absolutely linked to this, and we are seeing changes in transportation, and that will both create changes in land use and also necessitate changes in land use. That maybe the direction that we are right now is ripe for disruption as well. So let me ask, in the presentation I gave and a lot of the work that we do around the country and globally, change is the constant. Like, it is fast moving, and it is a constant kind of trying to understand what might be coming next. How does an agency like UDOT work with the private sector in how can they be nimble in a quickly changing environment? What would you love to see? You've got a fantastic audience of people here that you can help shape the way that they might build their regulations and their programs. What would you like to see that you think would be positive in a way that public sector and private sector can work together?
Sure. Well, I don't think many people imagined in the public sector talking to scooter companies, but I can tell you a great deal of my time is spent talking to UDOT and UTA and different city organizations. So I can't stress enough that these solutions aren't going to come from the public or private sector. It's going to be collaboration, it's going to be communication, and the more we can do those things, the faster we're going to reach these goals.
I think the biggest thing is going back to that theme of fail often, fail early. Instead of saying, what will this gain, or what will the gain be for our community, say, what will you learn? Transportation changes are coming are coming from varied sources. There are things that you wouldn't expect. One of the things that we went to look at in our firm is we went to Nigeria, because there, a car is a precious commodity. It would never be sat idle, because owning it is so expensive that you're going to look for every single opportunity to utilize it. So much so that people will buy a car as an investment. They will use that car to drive from their rural village into the city, and then while they are working during that week, they'll stay in the city. They will rent their car out to people who will use it for deliveries, rideshare, et cetera, because the car is a precious commodity. So as we are looking at this as a community, start asking yourself, what are we going to learn? What can we change, or what will we gain, not necessarily in throughput or capacity, but what will we gain in knowledge that we will be able to use to help grow over time?
Before you answer, I'm going to push you all a little bit. What is it that Utah DOT needs to change to help make those relationships happen? Kenzie, you said that public and private relationships or cooperation can be really important. What needs to happen to help make that happen? How do you create a structure that allows that?
I think the first step might be defining where our mission statements align, and finding that alignment and the commonality in goals. It's been really fun. I've been partnering with the Active Transportation Division. I'm a cyclist. I wish there were more bike lanes. Scooter riders talk about that they don't feel safe on the roads, and that's why they're riding on the sidewalk, which is one of the major headaches I deal with. So it's been exciting to gather that data and hopefully share it with you all to help improve infrastructure and safer roads for everyone. So I think that commonality in where we're aligned and can move forward together is what's going to make us successful.
I believe it was Paul or Adam who was at the end of the panel at the beginning this morning. Data. Let me preface this by saying I'm from Seattle. I'm not involved in Utah, so I don't know the great things that you may be doing behind the scenes, but I will say that what we've seen in the other cities and other municipalities that we've talked to is the more open you can be with your data, the more opportunity that you can give someone to learn from that, simulate, or measure their success or failure, the more success or failure you will have. And all of those failures are learning. I'm starting to kind of pull away from this idea of fail early. It's learn. Do something quickly, make sure that you learn something from it, and then do something better and continue to go through it. So if you as a municipality or as a transportation organization are open to that, have created either APIs or repositories of data that you can share with high school students even, that start to really give a frame of comparison and give people a space within to work, you're building that collaboration opportunity moving forward.
Chris, you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would summarize it in three things. The first one is your work scope at UDOT is going to be increasing, and you need to take the approach that makes sense for the work scope that you have. So trying to build a bridge, we all hear about agile today, right, and agile development, iterative development. Trying to build a bridge in an agile way doesn't make a lot of sense. You can't iterate on a bridge, right? You need to build it right, you need to design it right, you need to build it right from the beginning. However, in software development, if you treat software like a bridge, you will never get to an end product, right? So your scope is going to increase because you are going to not just have physical responsibility, but you're going to have digital responsibility. And you have to take a different approach when you're doing those different things. The second thing I would say is I was so inspired this morning to see an entire panel dedicated to workforce development. You all are leaders in that space. Really, DOTs and government agencies around the country have to think about that constantly. And workforce development has to come with workforce investment, right? You have to be trained, you have to be given new tools. And that leads me to the last thing, which is procurement. Everyone's favorite topic. Being innovative and moving quickly is almost always bound in how quickly you, or how much access you have to options, right? I'll use Jamie as a little bit of an example from this morning. Jamie has the biggest brain in this room on freeway operations, and I would love to see her using some massive, powerful data visualization tools, right? Excel has limitations, and I bet you Jamie already knows Tableau and other things like that. But you as a workforce that has physical responsibilities and digital responsibilities have to have an increase in options and capabilities and tools. So you have to take the approach that makes sense. They don't work the same way with each other. You can't build software the same way you build bridges, and you can't build bridges the same way you build software. You have to be invested in. You have to share with your leaders the tools that you need. And I think most importantly, you have to go find out what those tools are. No one is going to tell you what they are. You have to be hungry and seek that learning yourself. And then share the need for those tools. And then procurement at any agency, and even any company, honestly, is the critical path, always. And if you can create more flexible, open procurement options to get tools and new ideas and new things in front of you, you'll be the most flexible, innovative DOT out there.
And I would recommend you all look, if you're not familiar with Los Angeles' Office of Extraordinary Innovation, very much the topics you're talking about. They said, you know, a lot of things are changing, but we do have to do some things like by the book and be like a solid, you know, we can't make it up on a bridge. And so they just kind of carved off a piece of the functioning in the LA area to say, like, this is going to be the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. We're going to take risks. We're going to try things out. We're going to talk to the private sector and let them come up with ideas and figure out how we make procurement happen around that. And it was a political will that made that happen, and then a whole lot of policy. They've got a fantastic policy you can find online that shows you how they organize that, which I think is a great opportunity. Also talking with Mackenzie's comments about aligning goals. We did a session about 2 years ago, almost a year and a half ago, in Seattle, where we had the cities of Seattle, Vancouver, and Portland, Vancouver, BC, and Portland, all come together with Lyft, Uber, Ford Smart Mobility, and GM Cruise. And the whole idea was like, let's figure out how we align goals. It was shocking how much both groups had no idea about the other people's goals. To me, what was most shocking was that the private sector didn't understand the public sector goals, because most of those are pretty public. I mean, like, by law, we all have to know what those things are. And yet their main focus had been on deployment and not on figuring, you know, exactly as Mackenzie said, if you can figure out where your goals align with the private sector goals, and the private sector can figure out where their goals align with the public sector goals, and they can solve problems for each other, that is a place that you can be acting. Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
You talked about data visualization, and one of the things that I want to touch on there is diversity. Data visualization means something very different to all of you. You're in the industry, you know this space. You think about transportation differently than other people do. Give yourselves credit for that. It's a very different space to be in. And what happens is when you're in that space, you take it as common sense. When you get on the freeway, your perception of the freeway is probably radically different than somebody who works in healthcare or something else. So bring other folks in. When you're creating a data visualization, think about how that is going to affect people outside of your industry. What does it mean to them? How does it relate to them? What does it allow them as an opportunity to give back to you at UDOT? Sorry.
Great. So let me ask you a question. If you could wave a magic wand and have this fantastic organization before us here change one thing, or DOTs, if you don't work in Utah, DOTs change one thing that you think would just be a win-win across the board, would let us attain this kind of positive future that we're hoping for, and not run into some of the dystopian pieces of this. What do you wish UDOT would do? What change would you like to see?
On the spot, that's tough. So I'll talk a little bit about an activity that Panasonic and UDOT are already doing, and I think it has so much. There's so much value coming out of it. I don't want to say do what we're already doing, but do that on a bigger scale is maybe what my recommendation would be. So we're building software with UDOT, right? And we've been intentional about not doing what companies have historically done and take our R&D money and our dollars that we have and go off in our corner and say, we have these great ideas and we think we know what all those people need. And we build that thing for 3 years and then we launch it and you're like, that's cool, kind of, but not really. Change it this way, change it that way, so on and so forth. That's not innovative. It's not productive. It's not efficient. And so in Utah, we're so excited to be here and collaborating with you all on building together. Rather than building in a corner by ourselves, we're asking and understanding what your daily challenges are, what your needs are, what your goals of your individual roles are, and what your frustrations are in those roles. And understanding your workflow. And if we can simplify your workflow and still accomplish your goals and reduce some of your frustrations, that is the ultimate thing for any private company to build a new piece of software or a new thing for you. And we call that user research. So we've done this on a very small scale within the software team that we're building right now. But we've talked to planning, and we've talked to safety, and we've talked to maintenance, and we've talked to operations. And we're trying to understand your roles, your goals, and your frustrations. And I think the panel has already said it, but no one knows your expertise like you do, right? You know the bridge dynamics. You know the operations of the roadway. And people out in private industry are constantly trying to guess that. If you could have a way within your organization to openly define and share all the roles within your organization, your goals and your frustrations, people will solve those problems for you. And then if you wrap that in a really innovative procurement mechanism, everything would be awesome. But I think that's what's key, right? Let's stop having people bring things to you that they think work for you. Let's have you define what you need and how it can work for you.
You got the safest one because you don't work here, so you can just talk about WashDOT.
So I want to talk about looking in the future. The people are coming. Let me touch on that for a second. I, many years ago, lived in Midway and Provo, so I have spent some time here as a child. And I've been back to visit family and things of that nature. This is a beautiful place to live. This is an amazing set of communities. You all live here, so I'm sure you all know this. The rest of the world will figure it out. Climate change is coming. Places that people think are very desirable to live now are going to go underwater. So they're going to be looking for new desirable places to live, and they could end up here. The quote this morning was 2050, 6 million? Yeah. And we're now at 3. That's not a lot of time for a doubling in growth. So what should ODOT do, or UDOT do? What should you guys think about? Be transparent, be open, and look for as much involvement as you can possibly get. Try and get ideas from all over, from different age groups, from different communities, from other. I'm saying a lot of this, and I know that you guys are doing this. Like, it is absolutely a fact that UDOT is one of the leaders in all transportation agencies. So you've started down this path, continue down this path, go broader. Look at adjacencies that may be, like our trip to Nigeria was incredibly informative. There are places in the world where you can get a glimpse of what the future might look like if you squint carefully. So be open to those, look for those.
I'll just add one thing. So one of the conversations that came out yesterday, people were talking about how do you communicate these things? How do you, reach out to stakeholders and not have like the same 7 people show up and have the same 2 points that they always make? And one of the things I suggested is, well, how would you communicate about this if you if you were Nike, or if you were Coca-Cola, or if you were, how would you act if that's the strategy you were thinking of? Like, you really need, like, this was your business. You had to bring people to these meetings, right? I mean, maybe it's worth investment in having those types of minds, not Nike and Coke, but their communications, branding, marketing people, talk to you to figure out how it is you can bring that kind of strategy to your conversations.
So speaking on that strategy, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is the cost of transportation and how hidden it is. The cost of transportation is very apparent if you're using public transport, or you're using a scooter, or you're using a mobility service. We can see my trip cost me $10, or my trip to the airport normally from Seattle from my house is $45. When I compare that to the $38 that I know it cost me to park for one night at the airport. We make those calculations very, very quickly. But when I said I compared that to the $38 for the parking, that doesn't include the time that it would take for me to drive, the cost of my car, the cost of my insurance, and all these other things. We have so many nested things. And if people thought about the cost of their drive, how many people would continue to drive? If I woke up every morning and I thought about my drive into work, and instead of thinking about the $15 that I'm going to pay to park downtown, Seattle's awesome, I was instead thinking, no, this total trip actually cost me about $20. And when I factor the whole thing in as far as time is concerned, it's $20 and an hour of my time. It radically changes it. Now, suddenly, if I've got $20 in my hands, I can look at very different ways to make that trip. So, and it changes the dynamics on the road, right? So this is the unexpected thing that comes from marketing. If you start looking at something which seems totally unrelated, it reduces potentially the number of cars that you have to deal with, which changes your plans for infrastructure.
Kenzie?
Yeah, I loved your response. How can we align? How can the private sector help the public sector solve their problems? How can I help you get people out of cars on the road to decrease traffic and decrease the issues you're seeing? I think that's what excites me about my role, and the collaboration is really important and really exciting. Yeah.
What keeps you up most at night when you think about this future? Of what sort of things? We have an unknown future. We have things that we really want to strive for, but what is it we should protect ourselves from? You guys sleep really well. Man, I want to live with you.
I stay up at night thinking about my son, who is 13. Teenagers. Actually, this directly relates to him. So my son is 13. He is 3 years away from the driver's license. I've been watching my nieces and nephews who are all in the same place. And their perception of transportation is radically different. They are less concerned about getting a driver's license. All of them, actually, except for one. We have one gearhead in our family, which is strange because we're a heavily gear-centered community. My dad races cars and so on. Only one of them wants to drive. And even he does not want to drive in traffic. He wants to drive at the racetrack, which is where you should drive. So the thing that I am the most afraid of is that with a whole generation coming up that is far less interested in going around, or driving themselves around, I'm most afraid that no one, that the people are not taking that problem on in that direction. That they are taking it on in the direction that they would have before, assuming that people are going to be driving. That we're not, that the mentality, the awareness, is not there to say that there's another way of doing this. That it is just as important to change the way we live as it is to change the roads around us. Like the idea that being more comfortable with other people, the changing the way we reach out to our communities and how we connect with other people, that is just as important. It's awareness.
Great.
I think about the threats to the scooter industry, what's going to cause the popularity to crash, and it's things like safety. People not feeling safe on roadways, people riding on the sidewalk but then getting ticketed because they're nervous and they have to pay that fine, but it's worth it because their life is on the line. Efficiencies, right? You're asking people to park in certain areas, and you're defining it by how we've defined cars and vehicles. People unwilling to make new space for new technologies. Working with governments putting too strong of regulation on new technologies because they're nervous and it feels overpowering. Those are the things that kind of scare me, and I think that's an important conversation to have multiple perspectives on.
Great.
I think it's primary one thing that keeps me up at night, and I'm going to pick on Waze a little bit just as an anecdote and as an example. I live in Denver, Colorado now, but I'm from the Atlanta, Georgia area, and you all probably remember the I-85 bridge collapse that happened there not too long ago, and it was incredible to see the community come together and respond to that so quickly and literally build a bridge overnight. I still don't know how that happened. But one of the really interesting things that came out of this scenario is people using apps are navigating roadways, right? And the DOT almost has no involvement in that or no role in that. You can consume the data from Waze and you can get that information. But the anecdote from Atlanta is when that bridge went down, all that capacity went away. And that capacity had to go somewhere else. And an algorithm from a company was telling them to go into neighborhoods in the surrounding area, right? And these are neighborhoods where the speed limit is 15 or 20. And if you're from Atlanta, like me, you add 50 to 100% to that speed limit, and that's what you actually drive all the time. And so you have cars coming through these neighborhood streets in downtown Atlanta area going 30, 40, 50 miles an hour in some cases, where they would never be there otherwise. But because all that capacity was sapped, Waze is sending people through these streets. And that's a major, major challenge, right? In my opinion, the government role is first and foremost always safety. And history has shown us that companies typically can't profit from safety, so they typically don't prioritize safety. And I fear that if we don't get government agencies across the country moving fast to keep doing the great work you're doing in the physical world, and accelerate your ability to do work in the digital world, you may not have a role, right? You may not have a role in being able to protect people's safety as autonomous vehicles or other things roll around the roadway. So I don't want that to sound so scary and so far away, but that's the reality, right? We have to have our agencies protect our people. And one thing I absolutely love about working in Utah is trust is an emphasis area, right? I've never worked in another state with a DOT that is trusted as much as this DOT is. And I think you all in so many ways continue to innovate and continue to provide the example for other DOTs around the country. And so I'm looking to Utah to build that digital right away and to make sure that you're protecting Utahns first and showing others around the country how to protect their people as technologies aren't coming to hurt people, but they can hurt people if safety isn't prioritized and safety isn't understood.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round because we have a minute left. What do you wish we were talking more about with all these topics that we're doing? What do you think we were focusing more on? And this is both, the beginning of a longer conference, so that can be fodder for further conversations, and also potentially further conversations that happen on the stage next year. So what do you think? What do you wish we were all talking more about? You have like 2 sentences.
Intermodality, and intermodality. This idea that we take more than one mode of transportation to get from point A to point B. That to me is a huge area of opportunity from an education perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from a partnership perspective, public-private, so on and so forth. I think it's the number one topic to be talking about right now.
Great.
I think I'm going to say holistic design again, building cities that look like the future we want, not just moving people from point A to point B because it's the most efficient and what we currently do.
Great.
I'm going to go with options. I think DOTs and agencies and even private companies around the country need the same experience we all have on our cell phones. You can choose the app that fits your needs best. You can choose the app that's designed best for your lifestyle in your approach to life. And I'd like to see transportation work that way, right? The best app wins out, the best idea wins out, and the ideas are constantly flowing. I'd like to see that happen in transportation in my lifetime.
And I'll add to both of those open platforms. As we look at mobility as a service, if we have closed platforms where you only have like 2 companies controlling all their own options, that is going to create disaster. I highly recommend open platforms. So I would like to thank everyone for the panel. And so this concludes this piece. Oh, okay. I've got 3 minutes for closing remarks. Boom. So I'm thrilled, I'll tell you, I was very excited to be invited here and to have these conversations at UDOT because of the changes that you are all making. As I'd mentioned before, DOTs are sometimes not the most nimble places, and it really feels like you're making a whole lot of shift to really focus on quality of life, livability, and addressing fully in your sights the changes that are happening with these technologies. What I would suggest is take this thinking, the conversations that are happening here and the conversations that are going to be happening throughout these next few days, and figure out how does that change what you're doing right now on your desk. You've got projects that are in your office that are going to be implemented right now, and you've got some projects that are going to be 5-year horizons, some projects that have like 20, 30-year horizons. All of those require thinking about these things. So I'd say think about how you need to shift, both the things that are apparent to you right now that are immediate to you, and how you need to shift the way that you're working to make sure that you can make those shifts in the longer term pieces. I'd say that is a critical piece. I can't imagine a more exciting time to be in transportation, maybe when like cars first arrived, but this is a crazy moment of everything's changing. We have the opportunity to define what our future is going to be. So think about what the goals are, where you want to head to, and how do you actualize that? And as an organization, I love seeing the amount of energy, excitement, effort, political will that you're putting behind that. So I applaud you all, and I look forward to seeing and hopefully working with you on making those changes happen. So thank you all. Thanks again to the panel. Good?
All right, I'm just going to finish up quickly. Go ahead and stand up, keep walking if you want to. I just want to very quickly say thank you to our panel. Thank you to Nico. I think this has been a very energetic discussion, and I hope that it's going to lead to more discussion for all of you. I have a few key takeaways here. We need to be kind of some threads throughout the morning. We need to be a learning organization. We need to try new things. We need to maybe try those on a small scale. And we need to be intentional about what we decide to adopt. But once we decide to adopt it, we need to learn to move quickly on it, kind of a discussion of our procurement process. But I want to leave you with this. We've got our slide of quality of life up. I asked each one of our panelists on the workforce panel to tell me what was important to them personally for quality of life and what was important for them from a work perspective. Now, Nico talked about sitting at your desk and thinking about what you're working on right now. What action do you want to take? We've got some stickers on your way out, and we'd ask you to pick up one of those stickers that represents one of these 4 categories. What are you going to start working on when you go back to the office? What is your goal going to be in terms of the framework for quality of life? Take that sticker, put it on your name badge. What we want to do is encourage an ongoing discussion. So when you see somebody else without a sticker, tell them to get one. Ask them what's important to them. Or if you see someone with a sticker on their name tag, ask them why that's important to them. It's the why behind all these things that's going to be important. So keep the discussion going on. Thank you so much for coming today. We have Carlos is going to be speaking at lunch. Michelle Page will kick off the conference at 11:15. So kind of make your way over to lunch. And again, thank you for attending.